Raptors general manager Bobby Webster has spoken out on the current state of the Toronto Raptors as we enter an offseason that is crucial for this team's setting up the future of this organization. So we're going to break down his comments, what he said, and how this Raptors team is going to potentially look given, the current circumstances, as well as what Bobby Webster is kind of revealing in the approach to the offseason. There's also some mentions in his comments, some interpretation, some over analyzing that have some Raptors fans speculating that Jakob could be out the door. So we'll dive into all of that in this video. But before we do, folks, again, over 51% of our viewers are not subscribed to the channel, and we want to keep you up to date with all of the latest Toronto Raptors news. And Bobby Webster speaking out on the offseason, it's going to be a big one for this Raptors group because, again, we made a ton of organization shifting moves, trading away OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam ahead of this year's trade deadline. We have a ton of free agents this offseason as well, where big decisions have to be made. And we have cap space, we have flexibility. We're not sure how many draft picks we're going to have, but we will definitely have two near first-round picks, one definite first-round pick and one Detroit Pistons second, which is basically a first, and potentially a lottery pick in the top 6 if the Raptors are fortunate enough to keep their pick. But basically, Bobby Webster discussed, firstly, the overall vibe and overall feeling, because obviously this year was certainly not a on purpose a tank job, but we tanked the second half of the year in the sense that we just lost a ton of games. There are a bunch of L's stacking up for this Toronto Raptors group, and it's easy to get demoralized. It's easy for players, coaches, whoever's in the organization to be disappointed, feeling down on themselves about taking L's. But Bobby Webster's revealed this isn't really the case. Basically, to me, there's a huge amount of relief and excitement, and it's just a lightness that we're seeing around the team right now. Bobby Webster, in talking about the change in direction of the Toronto Raptors, if you listen to the quote fully in context, basically, he discussed how obviously, the Raptors were a championship squad, still had a lot of vets on the team, but they weren't sure about the full out direction, the full commitment in a potential destination. Is it Pascal? Is Fred VanVleet? Heck, even Norman Powell, are these types of guys that are going to be around this team long term going to be paid as number 1, number 2 options on this roster? Or are we just testing it out, seeing how it feels, currently evaluating, continually evaluating? That was the go-to word from Bobby Webster, Masai Ujiri for the past 2 years. We're evaluating this roster. It's not a perfect time, ample time to make decisions, continuous evaluation. So again, that leads to some tenseness. There's not that security long-term that a player, the organization is committing to the way that they have right now to a Scotty Barnes, to an RJ Barrett, to Emmanuel Quickly. Again, we have to give him that contract, but, it seems like they're setting up that commitment to our current young group. So there's that relief and excitement about, hey, committing to young players, having them given the reins to carry on this organization for the next at least few seasons, right? See how things go. Obviously, things can change in the blink of an eye in the NBA, but that's where the sort of lightness. There isn't that, year and a half of constant trade speculation about your best, more than a year and a half, about 2 years of constant trade speculation of your top 2 guys, top 3 guys. It's more so, hey, this is the core. There's going to be a ton of moves that are going to be made from this Raptors group, but it's unlikely to be the 3 central pieces, the young guys, the main core components of this roster. That's going to be a part of this team that's going to be building together. So that's what Bobby Webster said in that regard. Despite the losing, there's a lightness, excitement about the team. And then he also went on to say, I feel like we have the beginnings of a core, which again makes sense given the previous comments. But we have potentially 3 draft picks in this year's NBA draft. We have some cap flexibility, and we have tradable contracts. There's a lot of things we need to get right, but it's not going to be 1 or 2 big moves. It's going to be 5 or 10 moves where they just have to get right around the edges. They have to have some positives in regards to their 5 to next 10 moves, but he had a lot to say about the current state of the Toronto Raptors and the future of the organization. So that's interesting because obviously any fan, just the sport of the team, we're always looking for those big names, those big swings that are likely to come. We just had recently an article, blog put out about Paul George coming to the Raptors that I reacted to. Again, no chance in heck that happens, but people want to see the big swings go down for this group. The same way we traded for Kawhi and won a championship. But as of right now, we aren't in a position where one big home run swing is going to take us to a championship. It's going to be, again, getting all the things around the edges correctly, all the minor moves, the minor acquisitions, the 10-day contracts that we've been giving out in the second half of this year. The more of those things you get right, the more of a base, the more of a foundation you have set up correctly for your organization. I like that Bobby Webster, again, it's forced to be in this situation. I'm happy that we're not trying to, go mid 2010s, mid 2000s Knicks and try to make the, home run swing on every play and then striking out and just having a trash organization for a while. I like that we're trying to really build this team the right way. We have some core pieces that we know we should keep and build around and see how they develop. And then really just construct this roster in a way that makes sense, that can grow, stack on top of each other. And if we have our 3 draft picks this year, it's going to be huge. And the Raptors, again, there's been some talks about misses and hits in the draft, especially if we get that lottery pick. If we get that top selection, the Raptors have been pretty prime, pretty on the money with their top draft selection. So, hopefully we can sneak into one. That would be my dream. That would have me pretty amped up, excited, but we'll see how that plays out. Again, that's not currently in the Toronto Raptors' control, but expect a lot of role player moves, similar to what we saw with the first round pick trading for Abaji as well as Kelly Olynyk, from the Utah Jazz ahead of this year's trade deadline. Those are the types of moves I think we should expect from this Raptors group. And again, it's not going to cause U.S. national headlines, the same way the Kawhi trade did, heck, even the same way the Marc Gasol trade did. But it's going to, be sneaky to some Raptors fans, and it could pay off dividends if the Toronto Raptors sort of get it right. But that's sort of where this team is at, because we do have those 3 picks. Again, I broke down in the last video, but basically the Raptors are set in stone to have the 6th best odds in terms of the NBA draft lottery this year. And forget keeping our pick, because, again, if we keep it, if we don't, Bobby Webster directly said there's no real preference as well in those interviews to whether they keep the draft pick this year or they have it for next year, because by all accounts, everyone says this draft just isn't that great. Next year's is supposed to be pretty good. So even if we're a little bit better next season, and I guess we don't know how good we'll be, I don't want to speculate depending on how this offseason goes, but a mid-teens pick might be just as good as a earlier lottery pick, probably not 1, 2, 3 or something, in the years. I don't think the evaluations and drafts are really that, sturdy. I don't lean too much into them, but basically that's kind of what the consensus is in terms of what people are saying. Personally, I want to get our draft pick right now. I want to be able to develop these guys as soon as possible. Just jump into it, make the right hit Masai, make the right hit Bobby Webster, and then, build this team the right sort of way. Who cares if we miss our draft pick for next season? Let's try to get this right here now at this point. But the front office doesn't really have concern about that. They're trying to get right all of the little moves, because we've dug ourselves a little bit of a hole here now at this point, and hopefully we're able to sort of build a really competent, strong roster, because this team has shown flashes of greatness when we've been healthy, when we had some positive moments, and the vibes seem to be back, with Darko Rajovic, the players being bought into this team here now at this point. We have some tradable pieces. We have some, as Bobby Webster mentioned, again, some tradable contracts here now at this point. It's going to be a fun offseason. I think it's going to be a lot of things happening. I think we're going to see a lot of shakeups. But one thing that finally should be brought up, and I should have discussed this earlier because I alluded to it in the thumbnail at the beginning of this video, but basically, Jakob Poeltl. Is he a part of this team's future? Because in regards to vets that Bobby Webster named, Jakob Poeltl was not named. He was named Kelly Olynyk as well as Garrett Temple were named as sort of vets that the team has moving forward into the future. So that's also something you can say about Bruce Brown. But again, yeah, Bruce isn't crazy old. And I guess you could say the same thing about Yak. But it's interesting that he wasn't named as one of the vets for this group. Now, how you define vet, I guess that's left to be discovered. But, I'm not going to read too much into it. Now, the Raptors haven't talked much at all, even since we got him. Gary Trent Jr. has been a core piece to this team, unless otherwise provoked. So that's something we'll see if that affects his sort of future with this team in this offseason. Now, that case seems to be happening with Yak. So we'll see if Yak ends up getting dealt ahead of this year's trade deadline. But let me know what you guys think in the trade deadline, NBA draft, or offseason. You guys are the best thing this far. Subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. I'm signing out. Cheers.